Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from June 26th to July 2nd. So before we jump in, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Try to think of it as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the US industry, identify top US MSOs that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now market cap wise, and then take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. Of course, pending whatever incremental reform we're supposed to be getting in July. And so just to recap, thank you MJ Stock Trader for this summary. As July should be a fill-in-the-blank month for cannabis stocks. He uses the word excellent. I'd love that to be the case, but I'm going to stick with interesting, because as per usual, it is up to Schmuck Schumer. But the situation has gotten more dire. Will he finally keep his word and do the right thing? And we'll find out by the end of July whether the corruption runs a lot deeper and we've got much bigger things to worry about. But of course, keep our hopes up and keep putting the pressure on, folks, if we can. Call your reps. But on top of that, Maryland adult use sales start tomorrow as of today. And so happy Canada Day to any Canadian viewers, and happy 4th of July for Tuesday for any American viewers. And then TerrAscend uplist to the TSX on July 4th. And so next week should start off with a bang. I'm very happy to recap that. But, you know, big milestone, especially as cannabis is officially recreationally legal in Maryland. And so this was as of 12:08 a.m. Love to see the comments as people are obviously supportive of cannabis reform. And so a bit more just on the details of the bill in Maryland if you wanted to pause to read. This is an older one from Normal, but a nice summary of what will take effect as of today. And then from the Dales report with Maryland adult use cannabis about to go live on July 1st, an updated geological table of major operators. At least 10 MSOs have current or pending operations in Maryland, including all the majors and mid-majors such as MariMid. While Curaleaf has the biggest overall footprint, and while it does show in here that Cresco Labs has some exposure to Maryland, they were intending to acquire some companies, but those fell through. And so from my understanding, I was just looking, Cresco does not have that footprint. But of course, if their deal with Columbia Care were to eventually go through, which we'll get to in a moment, that would certainly help them get exposure into Maryland and Missouri, some of the most recent markets to come online. And so while that's unfortunate, as Cresco is my largest holding, many other MSOs do have exposure in Maryland. So it's going to be a great market for many, and just figured I would bring it down to this from Jesse Redmond. Here's a chart I've been updating. Maryland and Missouri have almost identical population, 6.1 million, but drastically different MSO exposure. And so a different way of looking at that information down there. And so with that though, just to share, as TerrAscend declares its independence, relaying what we saw in the first bit, as their new common shares will commence trading on the TSX on July 4th with new ticker symbol TSND. And so it's quite poetic timing. They get to free themselves from the shackles of the CSE just in time for Independence Day. But will this lead to more institutional capital coming in or more attention to U.S. cannabis companies? All we can do is hope, but we needed someone to take initiative. And so thank you, TerrAscend, for doing that. Mad respect. Their old shares stopped trading as of June 30th. And just a reminder, the Canadian stock markets are closed for Canada Day on July 3rd. And I imagine the U.S. ones are closed on July 4th for Independence Day. So just remember, no markets until probably next Wednesday. And so with that, TerrAscend increases footprint in Maryland to 4 dispensaries with agreement to acquire herbiculture transaction already approved by Maryland regulator. And so they're wasting no time. TerrAscend has had a hot June, and just figured I would share this as of probably their last release for the month, but to celebrate a very successful month, buying another dispensary for just $8.25 million, expected to be immediately accretive on an EBITDA and cash flow basis as this dispensary turns adult use today. And so, man, good for them. You can pause to read a little bit more down here. Otherwise, I'm going to scroll down and bring you to the rest. Otherwise, of course, grab the full link if you're interested. But good to see TerrAscend continue to crush it. While the sad news that we got yesterday, Cresco Labs and Columbia Care provide update on their transaction. And so just a reminder that this was a self-imposed deadline. It wasn't one set by regulators. But ultimately, we didn't get much out of this, just that they announced they will not be able to complete divestitures necessary to secure all necessary regulatory approvals to close the pending transaction. So it seems like they still have to sell some stuff in New York. At this stage, they're working amicably with respect to the next steps in relation to the transaction, and will provide further updates in the near future. As a shareholder, I'm holding heavy bags, not much I can do. It's not ideal, but I imagine both parties want to get this done because Columbia Care cannot afford the cancellation fee, and Cresco Labs does not want to lose out on the footprint that Columbia Care has, especially when you consider Columbia Care's exposure to two of the hottest new markets in the country, Missouri and now Maryland. And so we know Cresco doesn't want to lose out on that, and I don't believe Columbia Care can jump ship and partner with someone else based on the terms of the deal and how much it would cost them. And so while this sucks in the short term, it is a self-imposed deal, so it doesn't mean that it will not eventually go through if they cannot figure out a new amended deal that's going to fit both parties and eventually complete the divestiture. So all I can really do is trust in Charlie until he proves me wrong, and just let this be a good reminder that that it's important to stay patient, and cash is always king. Don't let the hopium get the best of you. On the bright side, at least the rest of their team is focusing on what they can control in the short term and expanding their footprint in key states, as Cresco Labs adds 2 dispensaries in Washington and Somerset to their PA footprint, which is still medical only, but lots of talk about legislation getting passed in 2024, although they always talk about getting that done in PA and never do. PA is a core market for Cresco Labs, and so hence why they typically want to go deeper in markets where they have higher share. So of course you can pause to read if you're interested, or grab the full link in the description. With that, from MJ Stock Trader's site, Verano continues Florida retail expansion with opening of Venice, the company's 69th Florida retail location and 130th retail location in the nation. So happy to continue to eat up market share here and expand, I imagine, but you can pause to read. As Florida's medical cannabis sales are projected to potentially reach $2.6 billion by 2027, if you're talking about potential projections, I don't think you need to add the word potentially afterwards, but that's based off of the current number of 828,000 qualified patients as of last week. We'll get to the new numbers in a moment, but of course, so much potential when that goes adult use. But with that, from MJ Biz Daily, Green Thumb CEO upbeat that Florida will okay the Circle K medical cannabis deal that most of us thought was dead in the water. So for an update, CEO of Green Thumb Industries told MJ Biz Daily he expects Florida regulators to ultimately sign off on the company's landmark deal to open medical cannabis dispensaries adjacent to Circle K gas stations around the state. And so while the agreement attracted national attention and regulatory scrutiny since it was announced in October, shortly after the announcement, MJ Biz Daily confirmed that Florida's health department hadn't signed off on the pact. But apparently, as of April, MJ Biz Daily reported that the deal was in litigation, and Kovler tells MJ Biz Daily we're planning for it to happen. And so very interesting. Again, it hasn't been talked about in a while, but this is Circle K from Aliment Couche-Tard, based in Laval, Quebec, has a massive footprint of these stores. And so it'd make for a very interesting test nonetheless if regulators were to approve this, and for whatever reason, Ben Kovler seems pretty optimistic, and so hopefully I'll have an update for you sooner than later on this story. But with that, out of some state news, Arizona Mirror, as Arizonians bought more than $100 million in rec cannabis in March, and this one comes from June 27th, and it's interesting to compare that the Department of Revenue reported that in April, where we see 420 and where we might expect more legal sales, rec sales reached only $86.5 million, while for whatever reason in March, maybe spring came early, and people wanted to vote for legal cannabis with their dollars because they're tired of illicit cannabis that typically floods the West Coast. March was where they hit their highest ever of just shy of 101 million, marking the first time since rec sales kicked off in January 2021 that they've hit the 9-figure mark for just adult use sales in a single month. And so very interesting. Also worth noting that despite probably a lot of illicit cannabis, sales were strong for the most part for rec throughout the winter, December 2022 through February 2023. They saw 93.4 million, 91.3 million, and 84.5 million. So still good to see Arizonians voting for legal cannabis with their legal dollars. And so a lot more down here, just breaking down where the taxes go. And so I'm just going to leave it here. You can pause to read and then scroll down a little bit for the rest of the story. Otherwise, you can grab the full link in the description. With that, on to Florida. From the Office of Medical Cannabis Use, looking at new dispensary approvals this past week. From June 26th to 30th, just one from Verano, opening a new Move dispensary in Fort Pierce. And with that, qualified patient count did increase by 1,631 week over week to 830,191. And so good to see that increasing slowly but surely every single week as more patients turn to a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative. Well, we got dispensations from June 23rd to the 29th, all the MSOs in the state, the number of dispensing locations, and then for this past week, the number of milligrams in THC sold, the number of milligrams of CBD sold, and the number of ounces of smokable flower sold, again, just for this past week. And so I will put the updated connoisseurs visuals in the comments as well, just so that you can easily digest this information in a different way. But with that, a little bit of global news as we jump to it. Kyle Jaeger shared as Luxembourg, following Malta, for whatever reason Germany can't do it, becomes the second European Union country to end cannabis prohibition, as they voted 38 to 22 to legalize cannabis possession and cultivation for adults. Seems like the right way to do it. And again, it's just infuriating why some of these small nations can seem to do it without getting any attention, but then Germany wants to do this, and of course these outdated UN treaties get in the way, and we learned sadly that, oh shit, some of the bigger European nations don't have the national sovereignty that they thought they did. And so a bit more details on what they plan to allow, and so figured I would share this from Marijuana Moment. The minister described the legislation in a notice about Wednesday's vote, saying it is designed to take a risk reduction and crime prevention approach to cannabis, according to the translation, mostly focusing on allowing possession and home cultivation, which is again a great step in the right direction, and so just wanted to share for anyone interested. Well, there's a bit more if you wanted to pause to read as to why they're finally acting, because no shit, Prohibition did not work, and so it's time for some new common sense policy. Full link in the description. But even more surprising, we get this one out of Ukrainian actor Volodymyr Zelensky, who's calling on lawmakers to legalize medical cannabis to help people struggling with the pain, stress, and trauma of war with Russia. And while this sounds compassionate, I think it's quite disgusting, though, that he's using this war that he's prolonged as an excuse to call for legalizing cannabis, as opposed to negotiating an end to the war a year ago, saving so many Ukrainian lives from there until now, and then actually just calling for legalizing cannabis based on the principle that it is the right thing to do, especially after everything you've put your own country people through, especially when you consider that this is a bigger proxy war between the US and Russia. And while Putin may be as big of a warlord as the US military-industrial complex, we also have Zelensky, who is an actor playing the role of warlord for a second consecutive year, as long as the US continues to prolong the war and launder money his way. Yet somehow he can find the accurate cannabis data before the US government? Come on, you cannot make this shit up. Especially when more and more studies are highlighting exactly what even Zelensky's quoting there, the effectiveness and adverse events of cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabidiol used in the treatment of anxiety disorders in a PTSD subpopulation. First published as of June 24th, 2023, but I'll bring you down to the juice. Obviously, you can pause to read all of it. Well, the results speak for themselves, as the total participant sample reported significantly improved anxiety, depression, fatigue, and ability to take part in social roles and activities. Those who were diagnosed with PTSD reported significantly improved anxiety, depression, fatigue, and social abilities. And get this, the most common adverse events, and think of possible side effects or reactions that you would get from prescription medication. All of the side effects they have to list on TV. Compared to cannabis, the most common adverse effects reported across the whole participant cohort were dry mouth. Get some water then, duh. Somnolence, drowsiness, and fatigue. Imagine that's it. Get a drink of water, take a nap. Why haven't we descheduled this damn plant fucking decades ago? It's a damn joke at this point. In the conclusions, formulations of cannabis significantly improved anxiety, depression, fatigue, reiterating that the new results essentially highlight why it should have been descheduled forever ago. And then Faith bringing up this more recent one, but does legalizing cannabis decrease fatal opioid overdoses? Study shows. And if this was true, based on the fact that in 2022 there were over 100,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses, how is the government not acting on this and making this the biggest public health emergency? It makes no sense. So frustrating that it is taking them so long to deschedule the plant outright. But researchers found that opioid-related deaths decreased by approximately 33% in 13 states in the following 6 years after medical cannabis was legalized. And this is a different study than the Harvard one I like to reference that found a 25% reduction in states that legalized, and that one was from 2014. And so with that, though, some great news as Marijuana Moment shares. NBA officially signs contract removing cannabis from banned substances list and allowing players to invest in cannabis companies. And so this is a big precedent again. Seems like there's a lot of momentum coming at once. And so I hope all this is foreshadowing. Just 2 months after the initial announcement, the contract has been signed and enters into force this weekend. As 676 pages later, the doc contains a number of Canna provisions, though the most impactful, arguably, is the removal of cannabis from the list of prohibited substances for players. Hey, federal government, take notes. So apparently going forward, players can hold a direct or indirect ownership interest in an entity that produces or sells CBD products, a lot of focus on CBD. They can also invest in cannabis companies as long as the investment is passive and the player's ownership is less than 50% of the business. And while they're not implying investing in Tier 1 MSOs through the stock exchanges, what's stopping an NBA player from opening a Roth IRA, putting some cash in, and getting in early? Education in my YouTube channel, obviously, while another section says that they may participate in the promotion or endorsement of any brand, product, or service of an entity that produces or sells CBD products, as long as the entity isn't a cannabis company. And while it's kind of hard to produce CBD and not be a cannabis company because you derive CBD from cannabis. So the wording seems sketchy as it's open to a bit too much interpretation that could be used against the players, but I don't know, I digress. And so a little bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read. Well, we got this surprise out of the NFL, as Chiefs Travis Kelce estimates up to 80% of NFL players use cannabis. Well, shit then. Can more of you grow a pair of balls and fucking say something? Because if we had the influence of NBA players and NFL players finally admitting that they use this medicine and helping normalize it, man, the opportunities are endless. And so a little bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read. Yada, yada. All of NFL players are using the same substance that got him in trouble. And so he talks a little bit more about it here. Pause to read. Otherwise, I'll scroll down to the end. Otherwise, full story, of course, in the description. But with that, for some more stories, Tom Engel shares, Scoop, even the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union is urging the Biden admin officials to not only just outright deschedule cannabis, which would be great, but also take steps to protect cannabis workers, to stop armed robberies by passing safe banking, prevent industry monopolization by reducing predatory harms so that small businesses could also open and compete by passing safe banking, and repair past drug war harms by allowing those social equity entrepreneurs a chance to actually start by passing safe banking. And so no doubt, if we just deschedule, we don't need safe banking because overnight cannabis would become legal as opposed to illegal. And while that wouldn't change or say, give people their lives back overnight, no doubt it's a step in the right direction, as that would mean things would need to be changed that would recognize cannabis as no longer illegal than legal. But nonetheless, they're also clearly calling for the Safe Banking Act in the short term, and hopefully we do get some descheduling surprise by the end of the year. But with that, on to some more state news as Detroit prepares to issue another 50 cannabis licenses as they're gearing up to launch the second phase of adult use cannabis license rollout. To date, Detroit has issued 36 adult use licenses, at least 20 of which were social equity applicants, and now the city is gearing up to accept applicants for another 50 licenses. Again, ending cannabis reform no doubt is beneficial for those that operate in the legal industry, including 30 adult use dispensaries, 10 microbusinesses, and 10 consumption establishments, but only when the regulators and the politicians are working for the legal industry as opposed to the black market. And so love to see this out of Michigan. Grab the full link in the description, but that's pretty much it. You don't need to. On to New York from Brad Racino. This was a big one as New York's $150 million cannabis social equity fund is officially funded by Chicago Atlantic 1 year after the fund's formation. So they finally found lenders that are willing to, take this massive risk, but the money is for CAURD licensees to help them build out dispensaries. Story to come. But the best part was this comment from Cousin Brosepi Broskino. Anyone know the terms? Because if you or I was a CAURD licensee holder, we would no doubt want to have as much information available to let us know the next steps so that we can actually turn this license into a physical storefront where we can actually sell out of. Brad says, I'll ask, prepare to wait 9 to 12 months for the DASNY to answer. And so we go to the press release. Could there be any more information as Hochul announces $150 million investment in the Cannabis Social Equity Investment Fund. Commitment secures up to $200 million for the fund to support individuals harmed by the disproportionate enforcement of cannabis laws. And so essentially reading through it all doesn't tell us anything other than the fact that we secured this money from this group. No plans going forward have essentially been announced. But then if you read through it, even more silly is that most of this press release is just people that work under Hochul, tooting Hochul's horn, saying how proud they are of her, their supreme leader, and how they're bringing socialism to New York. You cannot make this shit up. We're proud to support the supreme leader. Today is a historic milestone in the history of justice and social equity for our supreme leader. Thank you to Chicago Atlantic for investing in our Supreme Leader's ideas. Governor Hochul, our Supreme Leader, announced, it's really fucked up and weird to read all this. Especially Chris Webber. Hey, how are you even still involved with this conflict of interest? And so a bit more down here. And otherwise, let's see what happens with New York after this announcement. Can they turn it around? They'll still have to shut down those 150,000 illicit shops. So with that, from Cannabis Business Times, we got this story on Colorado's next chapter. Just figured I would share it as Colorado is the most mature market in the country. Yet, while many claim to still be struggling amid market challenges, state cannabis operators say they hope the worst is behind them and are focused on strategies for a brighter future. And keep in mind, there was a bill passed recently. I think the governor signed it last month. Collins, whatever, but the bill allows online e-commerce sales to begin in Colorado. And so maybe that will help bring sales back to the legal market as opposed to the gray market. But just figured I would share what's going on in Colorado if you wanted to pause to read. Otherwise, you can grab the full link in the description. With that, some other stories, not as successful as the previous ones, but Tom Engel shares big. The North Carolina Senate approved an amendment saying an unrelated House-passed bill cannot be enacted unless and until a medical cannabis legalization measure that's stalled in the other chamber is allowed to advance. And so it seems like the Senate is playing hardball and forcing the House's hand on something else in order to get that something else done, to get the House bill passed, in order to finally bring medical cannabis to North Carolina. So full story in the description if you want to go through that, but hopefully sooner than later we'll have another state that sees the obvious benefits of having a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative and launching a program for that. Well, we got this unfortunate one out of Florida as Tom Engel shares. Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill prohibiting people from possessing cannabis at recovery residences, even if recommended by a doctor under the state's medical cannabis laws. And just when you start to like DeSantis' policies last year, he starts shooting himself in the foot again with these stupid, short-sighted decisions. But residents are allowed to possess any other prescribed medication, just not cannabis, although cannabis is legal for medicinal in Florida. So make it make sense. Full link in the description if you want to go through that. While from New Hampshire, as Marijuana Moment shares, New Hampshire lawmakers send Cannabis Legalization Study Commission bill to governor who says reform is inevitable. And so writing is on the wall. It probably would pass with the ability to override my veto anyways. And while sadly it's just another big waste of time and resources, New Hampshire is another one of those states that's had a hard time getting any cannabis-friendly legislation through their legislature. And so at least lawmakers and the governor see the writing on the wall and they're taking small steps toward an eventual program as opposed to completely ignoring it. Well, we got this one from Marijuana Moment. U.S. Forest Service says state cannabis legalization drives uptick in positive THC tests for federal workers. Yeah, no shit. But what are you doing still testing? Come on. If you're not testing for alcohol, you shouldn't be testing for THC THC, because alcohol is obviously a lot more deadly, leads to a lot more crime, as perceptions towards cannabis have shifted dramatically. Why? Well, because it's legal for adult use in 23 states, hence, who's in the wrong? Individuals consuming legally in their state, or these outdated federal laws trying to take more and more of your rights and freedoms away? Yes, it's always the outdated federal government trying to weasel their way in. As public opinion has shifted dramatically and federal agencies are seeing an uptick in positive drug tests for cannabis, that's causing more workers to be fired. No, the fact that you're firing workers for this still is the problem. And so funny that he thinks to himself, noting that a growing number of states are enacting legalization, he asked, where does that leave the federal government? And it's like, oh my God, is he about to look in the mirror for the first time and realize that the feds are rarely the good guys? Not so fast. As the talking head continues, the Forest Service is a federal agency, and as a result, we are subject to any and all federal regulations that are in place. We're just doing our jobs. We're just following orders. Don't get mad at us. As a result of the confusion around these state-by-state changes, and I think you're the one that's confused, sir, and you're forgetting about what states' rights are and how they supersede federal rights, there's been a noticeable uptick in cases of employees failing drug tests. And well, it seems like you're the one, sir, failing your employees. I value all my coworkers and want to ensure that we all continue to do the work we love in a safe environment, Dixon said. I don't want to see anyone penalized or even lose their jobs for something that could easily be avoided. Well, why not grow a pair and be the first federal agency to say the U.S. Forest Service is going to stop testing for cannabis? You would be a fucking legend. Everyone would love you. But instead of, doing the right thing, rather than advocate for a policy change that would protect people from facing employment penalties over cannabis, which is discriminatory at this point in time, however, he stressed the importance of strictly adhering to current federal laws, to continue to follow orders no matter what. Scariest fucking thing I've almost read going through this whole story. Many Forest Service employees already work in risky environments. We want you to be aware of how this choice, not testing people for cannabis and wasting money and resources, could have a negative effect on the rest of your lives. Fucking propaganda never ends, especially when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty, folks. Thomas Jefferson. And so, well, last but not least, a final call to support the Safe Banking Act before we finally see it get its day in the Senate, hopefully in the second or third week of July. And the last thing we want to see is the bill not pass because it doesn't have the votes. And so while Don Murphy is confident, folks, now is not the time to let off the gas pedal. So please consider calling your senator or state reps. Let them know why you would like them to vote yes, because it'll make America safer, getting cash off the streets so dispensaries aren't targets for armed robberies. It'll help normalize the industry and stop the discrimination towards it. And so while this is featured from the Senate version, we know that the House one is picking up steam as well, but I'm just going to share these images because it's easier, summarizes it, and then the link for that one will be in the description if you wanted to check it out. But so this is the sponsors that we have so far. And let's hope that this time we finally get what this industry's been waiting 2.5 years for. And that is it for today's episode, folks. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Wednesday for a midweek update. Have a great weekend, everybody. And again, happy Canada Day to all the Canadians out there, and happy Independence Day for Tuesday and the 4th of July. Take care and have fun, everybody.